David's video traces an itinerary from a self-grounding, self-containing consciousness as the side of thought, which might be named as the fantasy of a certain modern Enlightenment tradition, a fantasy that is still very much around in the Academy, even if under pressure. The video moves from this framing of thought in which self-consciousness grounds or is the real. Reason is the certainty of consciousness that it is all reality, says Hegel in the Phenomenology of Spirit, toward an account of thought as taking place within an infinite environment that is both ungraspable in its anteriority and uncontainable in its dissemination. The thinking subject cannot encompass or step outside of this environment in order to think it finally, but is simultaneously enabled and undone by it. The thinking subject is a wayfarer within the real, without secure origin or destination. Thought in reality is endless departure, experimentation, improvisation. Thought in reality spaces out into the world. Thought in faith exposed to its outside, as the first movement puts it. The itinerary here is a deconstructive one, in the precise sense of exposing thought to what Derrida calls its quasi-transcendental conditions. The condition that makes something possible, in this case thought itself, is also simultaneously the very thing that makes that something impossible as absolute or finalized or simply present to itself. What is the condition of thought? What makes it both possible and impossible? In faithful Derridian fashion, this quasi-transcendental condition cannot go by one name, image, or concept, but is indicated by a plurality of nicknames. The video calls it simultaneously reality, faith, blind spot, creation, infinite environment, God, transcendence, blackness, death, flesh, and more. Thought is elicited and undone by each of these supreme fictions, to gesture toward the Wallace Stevens verse that is the epigraph to the whole video essay. The critical edge of the video is that none of these nicknames indicates the university as the condition of thought. The university is not the origin of thought, its condition of possibility. Does thought nevertheless take place within the university? Can it? Or is the university the precaution of those who claim to think thought but who steer clear of its chaotic journey? Both conceptually and artistically, the video charts its own chaotic journey against the avoidance of chaos, against the avoidance by the university of the possible impossibility of thought. It places its subject place within the university within an evolving, sometimes conflicted flux of images, sounds, and speech that say and unsay the enclosure of thought. We imagine a deeper reality, incomplete in and as flesh. In the faith of flesh, we disseminate out towards an inexhaustible ecology of wonder and mystery, an undoing of self, a knowledge becoming. More and more it feels impossible that the university could host the chaotic journey of thinking with and in the real, if it ever could. Derrida professed faith in the university without condition. That is, the university open to whatever is involved in the pursuit of truth, to whatever might arrive. But more and more it feels like the university is nothing but condition, the conditioned production of projects and knowledges whose bottom line is profit. The university as condition denies access to the deeper condition of thought, its inexhaustible ecology. Where then can thinking take place? The video opens with David in a typically ugly classroom, compensating for the drab environment with the performed enthusiasm of someone trying to ingratiate themselves to a potential future employer. The dimensionless place of the classroom, isolated and removed from the chaotic flux of evolving culture, is then contrasted with an image of a green, flowering plant and the words, living thought. This plant, however, is within a container. Its root system, that which connects it to its infinite environment, its ecology, the flesh of the earth, is isolated and contained, cutting it off from its originary condition. The video then goes on to speak of the risk of thought, its exposure to an outside that provides no assured direction, an exposure that opens the possibility of both the best and the worst, the messianic structure of experience. This is then followed by a deconstruction of the opposition of interiority and exteriority, inside and outside. Reality is not trying to get inside. Reality, the outside, is already on the inside of thought as the originary exposure of every inside to its outside. We fantasize that thought contains reality as an outside entering an inside. We culture reality in the university, placing it in our containers of knowledge. But what does thought in reality, rather than reality in thought, look like? The end of this opening section or movement leaves us with an image of a plant not contained but exposed, its roots disenclosed from the unity of a container. The image is ambiguous. Is this a plant freed from containment, or a plant ripped out of its protective, even if confining, environment? Is it the best or the worst? Do we still need the university and its containment to enable thinking? Here we are, after all. And sometimes living thought does happen here, even if for many of us it is difficult to find or produce. Where else might the risk of thought take us or take root? And how does pursuing these elsewheres risk leaving us exposed, for better and for worse? What calls for thinking today? The video leaves me thinking about and with one of its many voices, namely that of Donna Haraway, specifically her invitation to name the infinite environment where our thought must take place, not as the Anthropocene or even the Capitalocene, but as the Chulocene, which she describes as an ongoing temporality that resists figuration and dating and demands myriad names. Like Derrida's quasi-transcendentals, the Chulocene demands an apophatic many-naming, centering as it does those fungal, bacterial, vegetable, and animal others who sympoetically make and unmake and remake worlds through their co-becoming. The infinite environment of the chthonic ones are what call for thought, and they are what we must take up in our thinking in order to stay with the trouble of living and dying together on a damaged earth. Haraway writes, unlike the dominant dramas of the Anthropocene and Capitalocene discourse, human beings are not the only important actors in the Chulocene, with all other beings simply able to react. The order is reknitted. Human beings are with and of the earth, and the biotic and abiotic powers of this earth are the main story. The unfinished Chulocene must collect up the trash of the Anthropocene, the exterminism of the Capitalocene, and chipping and shredding and layering like a mad gardener, make a much hotter compost pile for still possible pasts, presents, and futures. Thought in reality, thought in and as compost on a damaged earth that might provide deconstructive transformations toward livable futures. We might even say that this video essay is a work of compost, a chipping and shredding and layering like a mad gardener, a chaotic, sympoetic mess of ideas, images, and sound. The video does not give us fully formed thoughts or mark out a calculable itinerary. It prepares a soil for thinking, in faith knowing not what might emerge. Finally, I read this video also as a working through a kind of trauma, the trauma of the academic job market. Read this way, thought in reality takes on a different valence, becoming thought in trauma, thought undergoing trauma, and the thought that might happen within trauma. What happens to thought when the institutions that supposedly enable it actually make it impossible to find a place for thought to take root? The impossible condition of thinking is here cruelly repeated, not as generative deconstruction, but as isolating exhaustion. The video works through this exhaustion, composting it into something generative, something living. Another word for this composting work is art. Thought in reality, thinking becoming art, thinking as art as thinking, the exception to thought in and as the university.